May the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts be ever accepted in your sight, Christ, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Are any of you familiar with the Julie Nolte series on YouTube? The Canadian comedian who goes back and talks to herself, goes back in time to January of the pandemic or March of the pandemic and brings news? Okay, first of all, they're hysterical. Second of all, I think of those every time I think about how we started. Because when we entered this pandemic, at first we all thought, we'll just close the building for a few weeks. And when we reopen it, we'll call it Easter. Then Easter came and went. And then it was summer, the longed for summer. Surely things will be better then. July will be fantastic. And then the leaves changed. And people built candy delivery chutes for children, desperate for their bit of Halloween spooking and sweeting. Children who'd not attended school in 7 months. But there's always Christmas, right? Surely we can have Christmas. And we did. We gathered outdoors with a wind chill of -10 degrees. Real feel. The wine froze, true story, and yet, then it was Lent again. Did Lent ever end? Seriously, are we still here? What? And we'd used the biblical wilderness as our metaphorical roadmap to the pandemic. But instead of a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, it really had begun to feel more like the epic voyage of the forgetful yet determined Dory the fish. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. I have no clue where we're going, but I know we have to get there. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Keep on keeping on. Then, Holy Week. Although I wasn't entirely sure if it was still Good Friday or not. And the eve of actual Easter, real Easter, the one determined by the cycles of the moon in our church calendar. A year had gone since the last Easter, and our hopes that Easter would be late and we'd still get to have it. So morning broke and we faced east outdoors. Outdoors still, but together. Celebrating Easter anyway. But it was Easter in the wilderness. Vaccines came as close to a miracle as any of us have ever seen. The horizons promise as near as inoculation. But science isn't magic. And fear fed the virus and masks went back up because we're going to be here for a while. And my feet are sore from walking. And I wonder how our ancestors made it 40 years. And I pray that someday will come soon, and that when we look east, we'll see our hope and not our fear. Because the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's fear. I first heard that sentence in a small church in Maine, set in the woods. Clear glass windows allowed a view of the white-barked birches and the quivering aspens. Birds and squirrels do what birds and squirrels do, and the light on the outside met the light within. It was a peaceful sanctuary, and the lines between the in and the out were uninterrupted because what was within reflected the beauty without. I could go on about the place and the space and the force and the grace, but the priest's words interrupted my reverie. The opposite of faith is not doubt, it's fear. It seemed too obvious, too simplistic. I wanted to push back on this phrase because, honestly, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand yet. But then, more life happened, and the phrase stuck with me. And whenever faced with the truly frightening, the existential threats that would shake my world, it was this phrase that I would turn to. Because there has been much to fear, and we have needed to find the strength of hope in the midst of despair's temptation. So what does faith offer as an inoculation against fear? Consolation, hope, a promise that this is not the end. Death, disease, war, hate, and division, these will not have the final word. And this might seem naive in these days, platitudes in the face of pain, but it is my consolation to know that the last gasp, the separation, the disunity, and division are not our fundamental or defining truth. Rather, they are temporal divisions, temporary and subject to the laws of time. There is a deep magic, and it gets better. Because it is God's nature to ever have mercy. God's nature to ever have mercy. Hear the word spoken to the people in the wilderness. The Lord is a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. A God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. It says that. It says that in the Bible. Ever to have mercy. Mercy in the wilderness. Mercy in exile. Mercy, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. When was the last time you asked for mercy? When was the last time you asked for mercy? When you laid yourself bare before Christ and asked for everything, when Christ asked of you the same question, the same question, what do you want me to do for you? Do you remember? Do you remember the last time Jesus uttered these words? To the Zebedee boys, James and John, who wanted to sit upon his right and his left? Do you remember how they asked of him? And do you remember his response? It is not mine to give. And do you remember later who actually ended up at Jesus' right and his left at the last at the cross when it was finished? James and John could not see. The disciples could not see. Not with their eyes, they could see with those, but with their hearts they could not see. And this healing is for them. And the question must be reconsidered. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. So, dear friends, what do you want? Not from me, not from the church, not from the universe. What do you want from Christ? I've been sitting with that question all week. And for me, the flip answer, the funny one, is a magic wand. But the answer in my heart of hearts is a single word: restoration. I want restoration. I want creation restored. I want my family, the dead and the living, back. I want everyone I've ever loved to live in the same neighborhood. I want all who've been lost to be found. I want God's will to meet my yearning for wholeness and healing. I want to be forgiven. I want so much. And I can't get any of that on my own. And so I turn to the one who dared to ask. I turn to Christ. I turn to this body we call the Christ, and I petition for my hopes that our faith tells me are true and worthwhile. God's love tells me, Christ's compassion tells me, these are hopes that will be fulfilled. The right and left hand, not mine to give, but mercy, compassion, and forgiveness of sin? Yes. That is the yes. Not to our petitions for power and privilege, but to humility and wholeheartedness, to wholeness, reconciliation, and restoration. What has been lost will be restored. Our grief will be relieved and our tears will be dried. But does it seem too soon to speak of dry tears? I speak in hope and not certainty, because even as some claim the wilderness has ended, others feel keenly the continued pain of separation. Because this is not the fullness of liberation. It is an exile. It's an exile because we know the promised land exists, and we are not there yet. We have tasted the milk and the honey, and it's not what we sup upon now. We have experienced the new life that is promised, but we know this is not it. And that is the reality of the already but not yet. And in this, we are exiled. In 586 BCE, the Jewish people were held captive in Babylon. The prophet Jeremiah was speaking to a people who knew what it was to be exiled from their homeland. And the prophet encouraged them to keep the faith, even in Babylon, especially in Babylon, to keep the faith, to plant gardens, to raise children, and to persevere, because they were going to be there for a while. To persevere in hope for the promised future, a future for which they waited and waited and waited. In hope. And it occurs to me, we are waiting too. We are waiting. And perhaps it's time to move on from the allegorical wilderness and into the metaphorical exile. Accepting the now. Not because the now is okay. Not because the now is what we want, but because it's where we are. And out of this, and in conjunction with our hope for what's been promised, in this time of waiting, we are called to plant and grow and sustain each other until this exile ends, no matter how long it takes. We know what we've lost. We know captivity. We know yearning. We know despair, and we know hope. And we know that there is community to be made, and community to be had, and community to be tended in the place where we are planted in the now. And for me, today, perhaps this is the space between faith and fear. The space where we trust that there is something worth hoping for. And in that hope, persevering despite our fears, showing up despite our fears, and committing ourselves to a future that we may never see. Because maybe the faith that will fend off the fear, is the faith of an exiled people who plant a garden. The opposite of faith is not doubt, it is fear. Amen.